Brenda there, and Charlie. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to councillors, and there are no members of the public today. This meeting has been held in person at the supper room in the Waihinga Centre and by audio-visual conference. All members participating via video conference will count for the purpose of the meeting quorum in accordance with clause 25B of Schedule 7 to the Local Government Act 2002. This meeting has been live streamed to councillors. So, apologies, everyone. I've got apologies from Colin Olds, who unfortunately has COVID and is not feeling well today. I've also got apologies from Kit, who has just finished COVID, but he's also not feeling too well today. And then for the rest, everybody's in attendance. Which doesn't matter. Councillor Jepson may pop in if he's able to, but he's got some issues with sick staff. So for the purposes, let's say apology, and we'll go to him if he's able to come in. So A2, are there any conflicts of interest today that you wish to declare?
Do we need those apologies?
Sorry. So if we could have someone to move to accept the apologies that we have and seconded. Thank you, Alex, and all in favour?
Aye.
Thank you, motion carried. So A3, public participation. So we did have Daphne Isa, who was speaking today, however she's cancelled due to health reasons. So moving on from 8 to 8.4, so there's no further action required there. So A6, we have extraordinary business. Now, did everybody get the paper regarding the signatories for the extraordinary business today? Yes. So I would like to just go down, sorry.
B2.
Yeah. So this is the approval for bank signatories. So I'd like to have someone to nominate and receive the bank signatories. Alex, seconded, Pam, all in favour?
Aye.
So this obviously is because of the appointment of Karen Ashford as the new financial manager and with the departure of Katrina. Also, there's been some issues due to COVID, getting people in the right places. So Charlie's, I'm going to get Charlie to, where is Charlie?
Charlie's having audio issues. She's just gone off and she'll come back as soon as possible.
Can you hear us, Charlie?
Muted.
We can hear you now, Charlie.
What's in the chat, maybe? Some of the
Critical Charlie's here.
Charlie, can you hear us?
So you start ring, Charlie.
Oh, what's that?
Sorry about this.
Who's being noisy? Do you want me to start? Teresa to start? Yeah, I can.
got Charlie here. But, yes, let's,
Through you, Lee. Charlie was having issues with her audio.
yeah.
So hopefully she'll get that sorted. Perhaps if we moved on to the next item or something else in the meantime.
Right, sorry, I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, Charlie.
Hello. Right, technology problems. Thank you. Yay.
Charlie, I'm going to get you to talk to this paper in a moment, but I did ask Charlie to send to me who is currently signatories in addition to what has been proposed. So we have BNZ, we've got Russell, Tim and Paul. ASB, we've got Tim and Charlie. ANZ won't confirm the information, and that's proved to be challenging. Kiwi Bank also won't confirm, but Charlie suspects it's Tim and Katrina. Obviously, that will change. Westpac is Tim with Katrina to be removed, and the Wairau Building Society, Tim with Katrina to be removed. So, do you want to just talk us through one of the issues I had, Charlie, was do we have too many signatories currently? So the ones that you said to me yesterday also were the proposed ones, or do you think it sits okay as it is? So just maybe talk us through it.
So it can prove difficult, especially as we've seen over the last 2 years with the pandemic, if people are sick or away, having too few signatories does put us at risk that we can't find someone to approve the payments, or we don't have enough signatories available to spread our investments. So that's why sometimes we've been having to put more than our threshold of investments with one particular bank, is partly because that one's the one that we've got the signatories available for. So that is the risk of not having enough signatories. The critical one is the BNZ, because that is our transactional account. So obviously Karen would be replacing Katrina on that. So that's just a like for like replacement. But it would be helpful to have Amanda and Stefan on there as well, just so that we have enough signatories in case of absence. I'm not as committed to having multiple signatories on the other bank accounts. It's just for setting up term deposits. So I'm happy if it's, for example, myself, Karen, and maybe one other on those. That wouldn't be so much of a problem. We don't tend to have emergency need to set up a term deposit.
So that would mean we'd have to change the wording of that, or would that be something you'd work out internally?
I would just work that out internally. So those people would be able to be added, but if at your instruction, I wouldn't necessarily need to add all of them. But rather than make the wording complicated of this bank, we want these people, and this bank, we want these people, we can just use that one wording as suggested to cover those setups.
So Pam had a question and then Mary.
I'll take this down, Charlie, because you won't be able to hear me otherwise. Can you tell me why we've got different signatories for the different banks? That seems to me make a complicated issue of the whole thing.
Historically, we've had trouble over the past 2 years actually getting people changed onto the banks. So while Katrina was here, that wasn't such a problem because she was on there and she could do all of the transactions with one approver. During lockdown, as you know, I started during lockdown and I wasn't even allowed to go into the bank to set myself up as a signatory for some of those banks. So now with Katrina having left, this has become more of an issue, and that's why we need to update it.
Because my suggestion would be that you have the same signatories over all of them if we can do that over time, because that gives you the flexibility to have, you know, to get a signatory at a moment's notice.
Yep, that would be my preference, but I'm happy for our investment banks to be fewer signatories if the committee recommends that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
What is the problem with ANZ and Kiwibank with giving us information regarding our accounts?
Because I'm not one of the signatories, they won't confirm to me who is one of the signatories. So if
we had a situation where a number of all signatories happen to leave, then we are stalled.
Yes, but we could do the same process as we're doing now in this meeting and get the instruction from the directors, as in the elected members, to add new signatories. So heaven forbid if we were all on a minibus over the Rimataka and went over the hill, yes, council elected members could nominate new.
And note that I'm an approver, I'm not a signatory.
Yeah.
Is it worthwhile just mentioning Kiwibank? Charlie and I had a conversation about Kiwibank about a week or so ago. So currently we don't really invest in them or have any term deposits because historically they've just have been on rates. And we had a bit of a conversation, is it worthwhile still holding that account? Because we haven't been using it and there might be some small financial gains if we remove them. But maybe Charlie, do you want to just give a bit about that?
Yeah, Lee, that's a good summary. Kiwibank are never the most competitive provider for either short or long. So whenever I look up the rates, say ANZ will have the best 60-day rate and Westpac will have the best 120-day rate. Kiwibank never have the best of any of the terms. So we don't use them. And there's no account fee, but they do charge us for end of year confirmation to audit. And obviously there's administration in just having the account open on our side of things. So I would recommend that, being as we haven't used them for over 2 years, that we would close that account anyway.
Does that need a resolution here, or is that just an operating decision?
I haven't approached them to find out what the process is, so I could bring that to the next committee meeting if there is a resolution needed.
They will need a resolution.
Or you could do a resolution now and just resolve to close the account. Yep.
We could add that as a further recommendation. Just clean it up. Just clean it up. Yeah.
It was just
the removal of Kiwi investment provider.
it just seems like a small issue, but it was just something that, I seem to think any money you can save and if you're not using it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just ask, Charlie, we use LGFA as a borrowing entity.
Mm-hmm.
What are their interest rates like as for putting money there with the government?
Very competitive. And that's the whole reason that we switched from BNZ to LGFA a few years ago, was that we clubbed together with, I think there's about 20, I think almost all of the councils now borrow with LGFA. So we get better borrowing power through that.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't what I was meaning. I was meaning I knew we did the borrowing, but do they have a facility to do investment side with them? Not
separately to the borrowing. So when you borrow, you have to have a bond of a certain percentage equivalent of the borrowing. So I believe it was 1.6%, but don't quote me on that one. That's just so for example, if you borrow $1 million, you have to invest a bond of 1.6% of that borrowing, but they don't do separate bonds unless you're borrowing.
Okay. And we need to change the signatories with them as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Excuse me, Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. Question for, I'm not quite sure who this question would go out to. We're aware that there was a staff member that was moving on. However, is there an offboarding procedure to capture these things like updating our signatories, and will that be looked to in the future?
There isn't at the moment, and I recommend that we do have that. So anyone with signatories should be taken off on the day that they leave, and then their replacement or equivalent, whatever we choose the structure to be, should be added once they start. But
So perhaps if we could add that too as a recommendation for offboarding process. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks.
Thank you. So has anybody got any other questions or any other comments? No. So I'm going to move on to recommendation 2, approve the additional name bank signatories, Charlotte, for sake of clarity, Charlie Clark, Karen Ashford, effective 7th of June 2022, Paul Gardner, Stefan Corbett, and Amanda Bradley. So can I please thank you? Moved by Alex, seconded by Pam. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Brenda? Thank you. Motion is passed. So we're now going to have a second motion. How would you like to word that, Charlie, that we recommend the closing of the Kiwi Bank account due to...
There's no need to put a reason, really, just recommend that it's closing,
To approve the
to approve recommendation to close the Kiwi Bank account.
Yep, that's perfect.
So thank you, Gary. Brenda, would you like to say? Brenda, all in favour?
Aye.
Aye, motion passed. So do we want to do a fourth motion to say that effective immediately that signatures should be removed on the day of departure for any current signatories? Echo that word.
Is that constrained by the ability to get into the banks to actually remove them? So that may be an impossible resolution.
No, removing it can be done via another 2 signatories immediately, so they can both email confirming that other person is removed.
That would be standard practice.
Tidies it up, Charlie, don't you?
Shouldn't that be standard practice?
That's what we're suggesting.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Right.
So,
Resolve that all, upon leaving the council, any signatory is removed forthwith.
It's just removed. Yeah.
Is removed.
removed by on the day of on the final day. Are you happy with that, Charlie?
Yeah.
Okay, can I have Pam to nominate that, and Gary, would you like to second that? All in favour? Aye. The motion is passed. Thank you. Thanks very much, Charlie.
Thank you. That will make everything a lot easier.
While we're on the job, is there anything else that we could make your life easier, or are you happy with that?
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Sorry, we got somewhat out of order there, and so I'm now going to go back to B1. So just looking at the minutes of March 22, has everybody had an opportunity to have a look through that? Were there any corrections or errors?
I'll move to accept.
So Alex will move to accept the minutes. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Garrick. And all of those in favour, please say aye or raise your hand. Thank you, motion passed. Right, so let's go on to B1. So this is looking at the funding options for reprioritised capital from fiscal stimulus. Now there's 3 options here. Firstly, let's just receive the funding for reprioritised capital from fiscal stimulus report. Thank you, Pam. Seconded by Garrick, and all in favour? Aye. So there's essentially three options, and I'm going to get Charlie to walk us through them. One is taking it from our depreciation funds. Second is to do a mix of 50% funding through the depreciation funds and half loan. And the third option is 100% loan. One of the difficulties is that these can't be 30-year loans, got to be 5-year loans because of the uncertainty around Three Waters.
Can we explore that comment?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just giving you a quick overview. Charlie and I had quite a long conversation about this. Also, if you recall in the workshop we did with Philip Jones, he looked at our reserves and felt comfortable for using reserves to fund this. But Charlie, do you want to just walk us through these three options and
Yep, certainly. So as in the paper, option one is actually the 100% loan. And as Lee mentioned, we would normally borrow for water infrastructure over 35 years, which is the expected life of the infrastructure. However, there is the Three Waters likelihood within a few years' time. So it would be more realistic to use a 5-year loan. That creates a requirement to collect $200,000 of principal each year from ratepayers, and interest would be $44,500 at current interest rates. So there would be an additional rates requirement from water ratepayers of $244,500 per year, which equates to $56 per year per connection, or $1 per week. Only water ratepayers are affected.
Yep. Oh, we do. Charlie, can you explain the rationale of picking 5 years? Because Three Waters have indicated that any debt associated with water assets will be taken up within the entity. What is the nervousness about taking a 35-year loan versus a 5-year loan? I just don't understand that.
It's just a more realistic term. We wouldn't have, so we take our loans in 5-year terms anyway, and then we just renew them 7 times if we use a 35-year window. So, but
we're looking at repaying this over at $100,000 per year repayment, whereas that would not be occurring over a 35-year loan.
If you did a 35-year term, it would be $28,500 per year would be the principal repayment.
Would that not? So, what's the issue with doing that?
There's no issue with it at all. We could do it that way.
Given that it is CapEx and it is infrastructure intergenerational, and we know that Three Waters will be taking over debt, I would be doing it at the maximum term.
Okay.
But I think we also have to look at the impact of on rates, and that is, I think we'd agree we wouldn't actually loan fund this.
I'm saying with regards to the analysis, we've got a couple of odd ones that I don't think the previous is.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So the information is probably not as I would like to see it.
Okay. I mean, we could have an option 1B of the loan funding, but with a 35-year term, and the total impact annually on rates would be just over 73,000 instead of 244.
Okay, so
can I ask a question, if you've Charlie, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
This money was originally CapEx.
Yep.
It's now going to OPEX. So are we allowed to borrow for OPEX, or are we going to be in the same situation where that's got to be picked up in next year's rates and end up doing that whole process that we had a year or so ago?
So Pam, this was originally CapEx renewals that was due to be funded from the stimulus program.
That's correct. Yeah.
Because there was an overspend in OPEX, it was decided to move the OPEX into the stimulus program and the CapEx into our regular CapEx program. So this is effectively an increase on our regular CapEx budget, not OPEX. And it is renewals, and our normal method of funding renewals is from the depreciation reserve, but there is absolutely no reason that you can't fund renewals from loans.
Okay, all right. So that was the point of difference I needed to have clarified, because I got myself confused. Thank you.
Right, any other questions at that time, or do you want to move on to option 2, Charlie?
Yeah, so option 2 would be just a fund from our depreciation reserve. And that the impact on rates from that would just be the loss of interest income from that reserve that would have been potentially earning interest. The loss would be, at current rates, would be just under $12,000 per year, which equates to $3 per connection for the year. So as you can tell, not much of a weekly impact. And then option 3 would be a sort of 50-50 hybrid of those two options. So borrowing half of it and taking half of it from the depreciation fund.
So Charlie, just to clarify, so that if we were at the specific situation where we're bringing this from the fiscal stimulus, if we were for renewals, our normal process would be to fund this via our depreciation.
It would, yes.
The normal way of doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Can I clarify that under Three Waters, and I think I know the answer, but that the Three Waters would also take over the infrastructure depreciation reserves. So
indications are yes, yeah.
Yes.
To my mind, number 2 is a bit of a no-brainer.
So just also, I think, just in terms of the amount of interest, it's minimal that would be lost. Initially, Katrina's recommendation was to 100% loan fund it, and after discussion with Charlie, I asked for the recommendation to be changed, but obviously subject to discussion. And after a conversation with Colin yesterday, he 100% support funding through the depreciation reserve. So that was his comment. Jeppy also is not able to be here, but that's his view as well.
One other clarifying question: does the lost interest income go into the infrastructure reserve for use for water assets also?
The interest income would normally offset some of the operating cost of the water department. So it just means that we need to increase rates ever so slightly by the amount that we're no longer getting in interest income.
Should we decide that we want to keep that reserve at that level?
Well, we have to pay for it with cash. So we would no longer have the cash available. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if we're looking at Three Waters, we don't necessarily need to replace that reserve, given that it's
and also bear in mind over time, you do asset valuation, so your assets, so the capital value of the reserve will change over time as well. So,
and if you recall, Philip Jones looked at those reserves and was comfortable with the level.
Yeah. Charlie, do we actually, because that money in that reserve is used for emergencies in the water area for that portion of that reserve, do we actually need to look at putting extra into that reserve to build it up again so that we have the ability to cope with whatever emergency comes to hand? I don't want to mention anything for fear of jeopardising.
Mm-hmm. So current levels of the depreciation fund will cover our renewals program. You don't have to fund emergencies from the depreciation fund. You could use a loan, but I wouldn't necessarily be more comfortable with dramatically increasing what we're taking out of the depreciation fund. It is sufficient, but not overflowing, if that would be an accurate description. And certainly if anything were to happen in terms of the Three Water scheme completely being cancelled, we would need to then look at increasing our depreciation funding.
Did you have a comment?
Yes, his view was that he felt it should be come from the depreciation fund. We discussed it yesterday.
Any more discussion, or I'm going to move that we fund the recommendation 2.
Yep.
As read.
So, and seconder. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Gary. All in favour?
We haven't. Oh, this year's.
This year's.
Okay, Brenda.
Brenda, we need you.
Star Trek.
Star Wars.
So, all of those, so Alex has.
Does Brenda want to make a comment? Does Brenda want to make a comment because she hasn't said anything?
Brenda, are you comfortable with that decision to fund it through the depreciation reserve?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have a workshop for nothing with regards to our towards that particular subject. So, and the recommendation was option 2. So I don't know why we're thinking about anything else. So option 2, thanks.
Okay, so if I can have everyone raise their hand, and the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Right. Now we're just going to move on to C1, finance report. So can I please have someone to recommend that we receive the finance report? Thank you, Pam, and seconded by Alex. All in favour? Aye. Thank you. I'm going to get Charlie, you to talk to this report, but first I'd just like to thank you for this amazing work you've done. Spending all that time with me the other day, I really appreciate it, particularly in light of our current staffing levels. And I just really want to thank your work is outstanding. I really, really value it. So thank you, Charlie.
You're welcome, thanks.
From all of us, not just me. You've been amazing.
Thank you.
So, look, I think we're looking in an extremely good position at this time, and also Charlie might want to walk through everyone. We discussed separating out some of the like mayoral task force and library spend, etc., and separating out the two, and it makes it much clearer. But over to you, Charlie. You're the boss. Walk us through highlights or lowlights, but doesn't seem to really to me.
Absolutely. The general comment is that the budgets have been very much stuck to this year. In the overall, so the top 3 boxes there that summarise the operating surplus, that's including the unbudgeted programs. And as you can see, our income is just a little bit over what we expected, and our operating expenditure is a little bit over expected as well, but that's because of those programs. I've added a stripped out 3 boxes this month, this reporting session, and you can see that 103% of income it's very close, and 99% of expenditure, again, very close. Our managers are doing a very good job of sticking to their budgets. And that reflects their input in the long-term plan, where they were able to specify what they needed to operate their activities. So very well done to the whole team is another comment. So the areas that we are exceeding our income is in building consenting fees, and a little bit of the Waka Kotahi operating subsidies, as we've now caught up with the budget in the program, and resource consenting fee income. Rental income is also ever so slightly higher. There's been an excellent program of renegotiation of leases that's happened over the last year and a half to 2 years. So we're getting a good rental income in council now as well. Any questions on our income?
Yeah, why is our interest income so much higher than budget?
The interest rates have recovered much better than we expected them to.
Right. I mean, that's that's 140%.
Mm. Yeah. During the long-term plan process, the economic indicators had quite a conservative estimate of the interest income, and we use those economic indicators. So, in the annual plan, I have adjusted to what I expect our income to be using Treasury's latest advice.
What percentage have you adjusted that to, Charlie?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, I'm afraid, Lee.
Oh,
it's been a few weeks since I looked at that part of the annual plan.
Any other questions? Brenda, have you got any questions regarding this? Anybody else? Questions?
Just a silly one. On page 14, we talk about free water stimulus as an expense.
Yes, so there's an expense that goes along with the income, and they are exactly matched.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's part of the problem, even like in the building fees, there's still a cost inside the building.
Yeah,
But it's, you're not seeing the net. You are in a report, a financial report, you see the net, but here you've got where the income's going and where the expenditure are two different lines. So there are offsets in both of those areas.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Operating expenditure is slightly over, partly because of those unbudgeted programs. So once we remove those unbudgeted operating expenditure items, we are actually $165,000 under our budgeted expenditure. So as I say, that reflects very good budgetary control. Overall, there are some areas where we have had increasing costs. One notable one is in IT. We have had to upgrade IT systems, and we've had some extra software costs that comes along with additional staff members as well.
So just on that note, do you feel comfortable in terms of the hardware we've got now, right across the staff from COVID? Are we up to speed with that spend?
In terms of laptops and actual physical, yes, but in terms of our architecture that sits behind it, that's actually where the cost is.
Yeah.
So our system architecture is glorified home network. It's certainly not up here. So we're patching our network, cyber security, and all those types of things. So when people work from home, it's not just the hardware, it's the access and speed of connection, those types. That's where the cost is. It's not in the physical machines. We're up to date with all that.
But you're working through to improve that architecture.
That's right. So cyber security is near enough.
Does anyone have any questions about expenditure?
Okay. Continue on, Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, I've listed some of the other items that are over or under. Water has now been resolved by use of the stimulus. So where we've moved that, the overspend that was there before into the stimulus program. And amenities is slightly unfavourable. But once you strip the New Zealand Library Partnership Program cost out, which is covered by the income, it's ever so slightly within budget. So it's just within budget. I don't have any other areas personally that are a concern to me, but I'm happy to take questions.
Just to clarify from what you said to me the other day, Charlie, the reserves statement you've given, and this is the same as last.
Yep. There's been no other unbudgeted change in the reserves.
Really good the way you've set it out and stripped out some of these extra funding and expenditure. It's great.
Yeah, the table on page 14 makes it very clear as to if you take out the unbudgeted things, we are very, very close to our budget.
That's great. So you're happy, everybody?
Just as an aside, you might be interested to know that the Lake Palliser slip that we had recently, we've made an application to Wakotani to fund that. So we're hoping that going forward gets that OPEX, which would be good. So pretty confident.
So that's the collapse that was in a couple of weeks.
Which was really quite.
Isn't that 100% funded as a special purpose rate anyway?
That's
So
right.
it falls on there?
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So it's just a matter of just routine.
A very good work on that. It was a very quick turnaround for that patch. Yeah.
I think the residents were all pleased out.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Question for Harry. Is this another area where we could try the eco reef? Just thought I'd ask.
We're only consented to do, so the locations for the eco route, remember their trials, and they are consented, so we can only go where we've actually got the consent to go. But again, it's a trial, and if it actually works, then we would want to expand that definitely.
Great.
Okay, so I think the only thing is to note an exceedance in February 2022 to the investment thresholds. So other than that, I think there's a need to do. Great, thank you so much, Charlie. Amazing work.
Yeah. So Charlie, so we're at the this is our 3/4 of the way through the year. Do you anticipate, other than the risk of a storm or those type, something exceptional, if we continue tracking like this, that we'll end up in a very healthy situation at the end of the financial year?
Absolutely. Traditionally, you do have some more expenses that come in at the last quarter of the year as programs catch up with budgets, but I have not had any indication that there is any risk to our budget at all.
So, I mean, that's remember one of the challenges you offered us was trying to really sit in our budget so we can maximise any surplus. Yeah, and so what you're saying is the really good work the team have been doing to really sit on top of these and not allow some angst in doing that. So we're in a good situation, but I think the team and the managers particularly have done an exceptional job managing their budgets to get this kind of situation.
Good work. Thank you so much, Charlie. And, good luck for the next few weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
Yeah.
Can I, I'm just noting that it's very interesting to see a 15,000% increase in grant subsidies and donations. I've never seen a figure like that before.
Do it again.
Okay, Charlie, thank you very much, and we'll get on with your day.
Do you want to ask any questions about the rates arrears?
Yeah.
I think just it's worthwhile just reiterating that there's a gap between what looks like a rates issue, but is just a reflection on the number of automatic or direct debits. So it's just a catch up.
And there are 11 less properties in arrears than this time last year. So.
Absolutely, yeah.
Pass on our thanks to Kirsty and the team for managing that so well.
Thank you, I will.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
Do we have a report on rates and credit as opposed to arrears?
Don't believe that's a
We do have that situation.
Although it's interesting you bring that up, because one of the ladies in Greytown I got on a direct debit, she had been setting up a fund with her bank, putting bits of money in every month, because she was nervous she wouldn't have enough money to pay the rates. And she actually says she's got more money now, she's got on to direct debit. So
Yeah.
it's good outcome. Great, okay, so we're now going to move on to C2, which is our policy and governance report. So I have someone who will nominate with the policy and governance report. Thank you, Pam. Oh, thank you. Brenda.
Oh,
Seconded
Brenda.
by Brenda.
Quietly, very quiet.
Quietly accepted. And all in favour, please say aye.
Right.
Aye. Thank you. Motion. So, right, over to you, Amanda. Do you want to
Can indeed.
walk us through these things?
I'll give a bit of an overview and then we can dive into questions if you have any. So the first part talks about the strategic risk register. I've given you a bit of a timeline around how long it's going to take to get it nice and tidy and completed, with a bit of process in there with some workshop times. The all of government risk maturity assessment framework is attached, and I can talk to that. So that is, we're aiming to have it to file for decision in August, like a properly nice tidy updated risk register. One of the things that I've changed the template for the risk register that includes an inherent likelihood consequence risk assessment, and then residual likelihood consequence and risk after mitigations are in place. The other thing I've done is really look closely at who owns the mitigations, because that's one of those things you can say FAR's responsible, but if somebody's accountable for the mitigation, we really need to be clear that they understand that that's their job and how it connects to our risk profile, which we've not been super clear on up till now. So the all of government maturity risk assessment framework is one of the things that came out of when I started looking at how to do a good quality risk assessment. The Office of the Ombudsman had made, or the Auditor General might have been actually, sorry, apologies, had made a recommendation that local government uses a risk framework, and they suggested this risk framework. The first thing it gets you to do is to assess your maturity. So it looks at the size of the organisation and the types of risks that you carry, and it matches you with the kind of, these are the types of policies and procedures that would fit your organisation. So that's recognising that a small government Crown entity, for example, with 50 staff might have a very different maturity level to MB, for example, and the resources and expense and mitigations that you put in are much more complex in a big organisation than they would be in a small organisation, and the costs associated with that. So some of the things that when I did that risk assessment, I'll go through in a moment. So we've got some opportunities for improvement, and I've bullet pointed those. So we don't currently have consistent compliance monitoring. We've got compliance monitoring in some places, and how it's done is better in some places than in other places. So we want to tidy that up. Explicit links between organisational values and behaviours and decision making. So that's something that we can tidy up. We're looking at our values as a team at the moment. So that's a really nice way of pulling those two pieces of work together. How we look at innovation is a really interesting thing as well. Like, where do we want to be innovative? What's our definition of innovation? And we'll put that in our risk policy. We don't currently have that in our risk policy. Alongside that, a clearly defined risk appetite. So again, that can be in our risk policy. Making sure we've got a clear 3-year cycle review. Assurance processes. So I think that's one of the things that I've really noticed is to give councillors assurance over the work. Visibility is really critical. Data collection, monitoring, and reporting ties in with that compliance monitoring as well. What are we gonna report to you on? What do you want to see? Where do we get that data from? How do we collect that data? We've got pockets of it doing really well, and then pockets of it where we've got gaps. Partnership policy, which sits probably really nicely with some of the other work we want to do with the representation review. So there's an opportunity to tie that. And in a delivery context, your partners carry some of the risk for you. So when you, for example, in our current situation with Wellington Water, you know, there's a shared risk that we're carrying, financial, etc. strengthening our disruptive and extreme event assessment. So we've already talked about that recently with some of the big events that we've had. Some of the stuff that Melanie will talk to after me around climate risk, we need to be really mindful around that, and our assessment of significant change risk. So those are the things that kind of came out of that. Now, if I go to the document, the appendix, basically it puts on page 1, it puts into those 4 areas: business performance, processes and tools, people and development, and leadership and direction. So it kind of makes you assess yourself against those 4 areas. It asks a series of, gives a series of expectations and asks some questions and gives you some guidance around what should be in place. And then it gives you the maturity levels. So, and there's 5 of them. So you can see where that, I talked about, you know, a small Crown entity with 50 staff would be potentially an M1. Something like MSD might be an M5. So then we go down to our assessment. I think is the next section, sorry, I can't. Yep. So it basically says, goes through each of the 4 sections, and it gives you a bit of a descriptor of what that level looks like and where you'd place yourself. So I've gone through and I've shared this with ELT, and some of ELT have looked at this, and they've kind of, and this could be a bit of a living document as we go along. We'll shift through this. Our current maturity score is a 2. Our target maturity score would be a 3. So I've just done some assessment down through those, reading through, thinking about what processes and policies we've currently got in place, where our potential gaps are. So that's lots of the next bits of the section right through. And then it asks you to go, it gives you a calculator. So what should you be at? And it gives you should you be a level 1, a level 3, and a level 5. And basically, because of the tipping point for us, I think, was the significant organisational change underway or planned, and I scored us a 5. And I've had some feedback from some of ELT that they agree with that. If we scored a 3, which would be some change initiatives underway or planned, but not significant in the context of the wider business, we tip down to a level 2 maturity organisation. So noting that we're somewhere between a high 2 or a low 3 is where I pitch us. So a minimum standard, I go where a maturity level 2, good quality practice would probably be a level 3. The reason that I scored us a 5 on that was largely because of the change we have ahead of us. Wellington Water, the RMA, the future of local government. Those 3 big predicted changes over the next 3 to 5 years, potentially 10 years, potentially have got some significant change for us as an organisation. So that's the tipping point for me, why I went 5 rather than 3. If you guys think, nah, 5's too high, go back to a 3, we'd sit at that 2 level. So yes, that's, it's probably within the conversation at that point, before I go on to the next bits of the report. Is that okay?
What is the consequence of going to a 2 or a 3? Is that an extra financial thing or an extra concern at this end?
It's time and business process. Okay. You know, so it's business routine to actively manage and mitigate the risk. You know, so how much it's effort. You know, so it's opportunity cost essentially. Yeah, it's not necessarily cost.
So it's in-house staff.
Yeah.
It's time. It's about how much effort. So what processes and what policies guide us, and what are the processes? How tight do those processes need to be?
So if you give you an example, if you're thinking of this in the context of small organisation versus big organisation. So a big organisation would have like an internal audit process and fund it. You know, so you would have staff employed to do internal audits. They would pick an area, not finance, it could be in your HR practices, and you and those group go and dive into it deeply and report to the executive team. So we never have that kind of resource. So we would drop down in times of the business practice to try make sure that, so our default is using audit, for instance, as our quality assurance mechanism for our finances, rather than have a financial.
In-house.
So that's really the sort of extent of a lot of money.
Yeah.
But we just have the resource capacity to do that. But you're still got to make sure that, so you're working out what your risk is, and you're making sure your mitigations do cover it, but they're not at that kind of bells and whistles.
I think this is extremely good, and I think it's worthwhile also good to have a workshop, which you've got scheduled, so. And I just think it's a much more robust strategic risk register that we've got in place. So just before you, Alex,
Thank you. Kia ora, Amanda. For the risk, effectively what you're doing is risk and assurance, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
What, in order to achieve the three, what's the time frame you're putting around that?
So August would take us through to giving us a really good, this is the risk register. As part of that risk register, you'd see what the current mitigations are. And I've looked around at what other councils do, and there's a really good example that I've found that says future planned mitigation. So kind of this, so, you know, what would take us up to a really good best practice. So minimum standard, we've got these things in place right now, and that gives us this inherent risk, residual risk, sorry. If we did these other things, that would reduce our risk in these particular ways. So you get a really strong picture around where we're at right now and what needs to be done. So some of our risk, for example, in my team, we've got policies that are out of date, you know, that haven't been reviewed in a few years and are past their review. That's a risk. But the work to get through all those policies is going to take some time, and we're not going to get those done by August, obviously. But to have a process in place that says these policies are going to be reviewed in this order, you know, these are the highest priority. I've already mentioned that we're going to have fraud, delegations and procurement at the next FAR. So that's the kind of priority, and we've kind of gone, what are our legislative and regulatory priorities? So they're the ones that we need to do because law tells us to, and then what are our high risk areas and where can we start to, so that's just my team's perspective on that kind of process. So it's a continual improvement process. If you think about it like that, it's a quality continual improvement process.
It's a living document.
Yeah.
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, Amanda.
You know, I've worked with very mature organisations, and the one thing that they never saw coming ended up being their biggest risk. You know, the NZTA is actually the classic example. Had complete regulatory failure, and they never saw it coming. And so what I'm saying is you do your best here and your analysis, but oddly enough, sometimes it's the ones you just never see.
Look, I just think this is great work that Jane and Amanda, and it's going to improve our register significantly. Alex, I'm sorry, I will repeat.
I possibly you answered the question, but I'm always nervous about a recommendation from a central government organisation to add complexity and further resource requirements within council. But obviously, this has been useful for our organisation.
I think it gives you a way of a process for thinking about what you need to do. It's not saying you must do A, B, and C. It's saying here's a way of thinking about your risk, and these are your options.
And so we've adopted that, and you're happy that we're doing that.
Yeah, and it's recommended for local government by the Auditor General.
Yeah.
That was one of the things when that auditor went. I think they looked at 5 local governments a couple of years ago, and there were a variety of sizes. So there were small local government organisations and big organisations, and they basically said start with a framework.
Yeah.
And they recommended this framework because it's already in place. It's a way of thinking rather than a must-do tick list kind of approach.
It's almost like the German legal service, isn't it?
Yeah. It is.
It's really saying, you know, what's the right risk framework, the size of the relative of our organisation and risk we take, as opposed to just trying to anticipate every possible risk and mitigate it.
Yeah.
Because that leads you down a very deep rabbit hole.
Absolutely. So that's the strategic risk register.
Sorry, just before we finish, that doesn't mean that we're not actively monitoring risks while we're still building this. Yeah, so we're still doing our operating risk register. It still sits on our ELT. We
Yep.
every fortnight. And so,
Yep.
so just give you assurance that this isn't just mean we're just ignoring it while we're rewriting it. We're still actively.
This is an improvement process.
Yeah.
Just on that note, so how often do the ELT review the risk register?
So we have fortnightly, we add or subtract risk, and then monthly we actually look at the full operating risk register and go through and say what are the mitigations current on this one. So it's an active, active process.
And the strategic risk register, how frequently is that review?
Well, we're rewriting,
As it
we're
comes up.
rewriting
This
that
kind of-
into
yeah,
it.
we
That's
still
when you're
keep in
rewriting.
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the opportunity we've got at the moment is I'm working with each of the ELT members on their areas and looking at their risk in quite a lot of detail, both their strategic and operational, kind of pulling it. Some of the stuff we've got, that's operational, that's strategic, we've kind of got a little bit of a muddle.
Yep.
So we're really pulling that out and going, yep, that's operational risk, this is strategic risk, clearly making, so it's giving us an opportunity to really look at it closely. So it's quite a lot of detail at the moment.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, so just, do you want to talk to us about the policy review?
Yes, so we've done a lot of work at looking at the policies, and as I mentioned before, as the example of the risk, we've looked at the ones that require legislative, that we need to address because of legislation, and the three ones that we've highlighted are fraud, procuring goods and services, and delegations, so they'll be coming through far next. There are, at the same time, there are a number of other policies that are being worked on. So as we go along, we're highlighting things that we see, and we might putting together notes. So we've created a bit of a folder of work, and as you see in practice, you see something happen and you go, well, the policy doesn't guide us very well in that space. There's a bit of a gap there. Let's put some notes in that policy as we go. And when that comes up, we'll have a collection of kind of ideas that we want to address.
And this came up the other day when I was co-signing
Oh, yes.
for the Martha Golf course, and at the time comment was made that any councillor could have signed up on that list alongside Alex. I made a suggestion that really it should chair of signing important documents like that. So that was just sort of minor.
Yeah.
But I think important change.
Yeah, so there's really good things coming out of that, and we're all noticing when we have conversations like that. Oh, that should be in that policy, or that should be in that process. So it's been really good work, and now that we've got Amy pretty much running the committees and council meetings, it's meant that Steph has got more capacity to do the policy work, which is great. And I'm also encouraging Amy and Katie to be involved in the policy work as well, just to build the team capability, and they all have to deliver on policy work anyway. They've got a whole lot of responsibilities in those places and understanding the policies, so we're doing it as a team.
So what's your expectation of how long it will take to get all of the policies up to speed? Would you say a year? I mean, obviously you've got to do it
Yes.
chronologically.
Yes, you'll be amazed at the list that we've the long list of policies that we have. It's huge.
Yeah, it is.
So we've got to start at the top. That's the most important. Let's keep on playing away.
I talked to a colleague of mine who actually went to primary school with. He's got a similar role to me at Farmers District Council, and interestingly, on LinkedIn, one of his colleagues, one of the councillors, commended his team's work about getting all their policies up to date. And I rang him and I said, "What have you done? How did you do this?" And he talks me through the process that they used, and it took them 18 months of really solid, focused work with a dedicated team. We're not quite as big as them, so I'd say at least 18 months.
So are there any policies that you would actually recommend to remove?
There are some,
Must be communication.
So, for example, we've got a policy that is not a policy outright, and it's the Greytown art hanging policy or something similar.
I know that policy, and it was one that I questioned many times about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's probably a process, and it probably would look like, you know, back in an operational level in our communities or libraries or facilities team, and then we need to make that a process. There's some little good easy ones to fix like that.
The other thing is people confuse standard operating procedure with policy.
Yes.
And so, you know, an example, we had the issue with the elm trees and cut out the trimming. So I asked Stephen to write an operating policy so that this happens again. We actually know, you know, who to contact, what the process is. We don't need a policy, but we need an operating procedure.
Yeah.
So you know, who to talk to, when to talk to, all those kinds of things. So there are a number of activities that we have currently written as policies, but they're actually operating processes.
So one of the things that we're really looking at is a good quality template. So that good quality template would have the policy statement at the head, and then be really clear, this now is a process, an operating process or an operating practice. So you can have them in one document. Sometimes it's really helpful to have them in one document, so because one of the things you want to know is how. So a policy statement is the why, the process is the how. So the how, sorry, it's the why and the what, and then your process is the how. And you can have those as long as you clearly delineate. This is the why and the what, and then this is the how. So that's just an easy way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And so is the expectation once these policies are approved moving forward that they'll all be available up to date on the web?
Absolutely, yeah.
An easy search, easy to search for.
Because they're a public policy.
Yes, a lot of them are.
They are about saying this is why we do these things, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
The public has some certainty about how big or how small that may be.
Yeah.
And that's what we did with the library ones. We went through over a couple of years and changed that, so we had the policies and then the operation.
Yep,
ones
the library policy documents are in a very good state. They're a good example of ones that have been reviewed recently. The financial ones that were reviewed last year as part of the audit are also in a pretty good state. So yeah, there's some that are a really good knack.
Excellent.
So
Congratulations. Brenda, I can see your little pause up.
Cool, excellent. So the policy you were talking about, Greytown, was the artwork policy - Greytown Town Centre. There were somewhat 65 policies that South Wairarapa District Council did have. A lot of them were combined under the libraries, so a number of them have kind of like disappeared already, but it'd be really good to get that all tidied up. And if you need any help, yeah, yell out.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thanks, Brenda. And then I think this is the last part of my report is the residents. There's a bit about governance, apologies. The residents perception survey. So that's closed now, I believe. We'll get a draft report in May. I guess one of the big things when we've talked to the provider Key Research is that they're seeing a dramatic drop in trust and confidence, I guess broadly, social licence across local government. So they've just kind of given us a bit of a heads up to expect to see a drop.
This is post-COVID. This is the
Yeah. So we had very, very government broadly had a very high level of trust. New Zealand was scoring like I think the world's best internationally level of trust in government in the first year of COVID. So we've gone very high and now we're coming back down for a bit of a reality check. So that was something that they said just to be prepared for, to see a drop.
Just a question on that. So key research from memory, they've got the ability to benchmark with
Yes.
other councils.
Yes.
And the question arose that there's probably no point in benchmarking us with Auckland City councils, for example.
no.
So will that data come through in the report, please? With
Yes.
some benchmarking included in the report?
Yes, that we've asked them to do the benchmarking as well. I think it gives you a really good sense of, particularly the comparative size councils. I can talk to them about who they're going to benchmark us against. But yes, that we've decided to pay the extra
That
fee.
feedback around, all the local government's going to take it on.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we have that benchmark information.
Yeah, otherwise,
I mean, they did an exceptional job last time. They did a great job.
But it would be nice to know who they're benchmarking us against.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We had to go back to clarify that point.
And then just the last little bit is just about quality improvements in governance, and that's to support our elected members do their job well. One of the things that we want to look at next is reporting. Mayor, you've commented on the quality of improvement in reporting, and I think we've got some more steps we could take that we'd like to do, particularly in executive summaries, and trying to reduce the report size for our community boards and our Māori Standing Committee, and making sure that they get the relevant stuff that's appropriate to them, because they're getting very large amounts of very dense, long reports that I don't know that help them.
I quite like the way the Māori Standing Committee approached the officers' report, which is 30, 40 pages, where they actually, instead of going through it all line by line, they say, you've all read it, please raise issues specific. So yeah, they do approach it in a much better way than some.
So we want to do that more formally in our reporting. So when officers are writing their reports, they've got a section where they can say, should this go to the Māori Standing Committee? Should it go to a community board? Should it go to FAR? Should it, what, just so they're thinking when they're writing about who the correct audience is.
Good idea.
Thank you, Amanda. Has anybody else got any other questions for Amanda?
No, great report, Amanda.
Great work, Amanda. Thank you very much. It'll be interesting to get that research report.
We'll let you know as soon as we have it.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mel. Good morning. Before Mel starts, I'd just like to see the climate change report. Thank you, Alex. Seconded. Thank you, Carol. All in favour, please say yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I think Tony just got that crop, Mel's been sitting there. Okay. Thank you. I'll let you talk to this now.
So today I will present you the work we are doing on the risk and resilience strategy. You may recall that during the long-term plan 21-31 process, we did a brief climate risk assessment across the organization to start to understand the risk we are facing and how we can mitigate those risks. And I guess the main lessons we got from this work we've done is that we as an organization we were needing risk and resilience strategy to deeply understand our risk and how to mitigate those. So that's the work we've been working on. Today, I'm not going to present you any results, but I will present you the methods we've been using. So it is based on guidance released by the Ministry for the Environment last year. And the strategy will be written as follows. So first we explain the climate change scenario we've been greenhouse gas emission scenario we've been using. So we used RCP 4.5, which is mid emissions scenario, and RCP 8.5, which is high level emission scenario. We're also using different time frames. First one is present day, second one is mid-century, so 2050, and the third one is end of century in 2100. From that, we can work on the climate change projection. You may remember that last year I present you, and we had a workshop with Alex Peter from Greater Wellington to present you the latest climate change projection. On the report, there is climate change projection link to go to see it, as well as a video. So I'm not going to explain those again. And we've identified hazards. So extreme weather events, sea level rise, inland flooding, erosion and landslides, droughts, wildfire, and heat waves. So those hazards are only the one relevant for our organization. Obviously, melting glaciers, it does not concern us. It will be an hazard for someone else, not us. So that's why it's only the hazard that concerns us. Once we had all this work done, I could identify all the elements at risk. So by element at risk, I think one of a very good example would be our wastewater treatment plants. Could be the water supply, could be the road. So that's all the elements we have. So our assets, our properties, but also our activities. Governance is an element at risk, finance as well. And we're screening all those elements, again, the hazard I just explained before. And from that, we can identify the risk. So how the screening was done, on the physical risk, it was easy because I've done the work on GIS, so it's mapping tool, and I have different layers with all our assets, so typically properties and the roads, the forestry, and other assets. And I have other layers with climate change projection and climate change risk. So, for example, erosion, flooding, and sea level rise. And I could overlay all those layers together, and it was quite easy to see where we have risk and where there is no risk. So that was for the physical impact. And for the other impacts, such as finance or governance, obviously it's not a mapping exercise. So it's not really against one specific hazard, it will be against climate change. So climate change will impact our finance because, for example, it's going to cost more to maintain the same level of service. So that's what I've done so far. And the next step was a risk rating. I've started this risk rating, but you can see that in the next step there is workshop, because I do not have the skills and I'm not an expert, obviously, in all the matters the council is working on. And that's why I need to have all elected members and managers from the council to have a fine understanding of the risk rating. And that's what we will do. I think the date is on the 25th of May to really be able to identify the level of risk more deeply and more precisely than what I can do all alone. And we will also have a second workshop to identify the mitigation measures. So in the background between the first one and the second one, I will identify the measure I already know, and I know that are doable. But obviously, once again, I will need everyone's brain and everyone's skills to make sure that we have a full list, and ideally we would like to have at least one measure in front of each risk identified to make sure that we can mitigate those risks. Just to give you a little bit of a little more details, so far I've identified, I think, about 65 risks. So, yes, it's a bit scary. Some they have no, they are a risk, but even if the risk happened, it's not, it doesn't have a lot of consequences, but they are still a risk, so they are listed. So it's quite a lot of work, but it's amazing to do it, and I really think that it's going to be very important for the council to have this deep understanding to be prepared for, once again, the time frame for today, but for also in the future, so mid-century and end of the century. We aim to present you with the final version of this strategy by the 22nd of June at the next Audit and Risk Committee.
Amazing work to do.
Mel, we went to the combined council meeting yesterday. There's a very good summary that Bruce Giddens presented on the resilience strategy. And so there's I can see a lot of overlap. I mean, for instance, he was showing transfer evaporation maps. They were showing what would happen to hot days, for instance. You know, so hot days will go from an average of 30 days to 100 hot days, which is 30. And so that means the propensity of droughts, for instance, much higher soil moisture depths and those kind. So are you getting? Do you get connected to that? That's really making sure that you are connected to that. What's happening in that space?
So I am. I don't know if I said that already, but this work I have been doing is only for our organization.
Yeah.
It's not for the district-wide. Okay. Yeah, it's really for our activities, our assets, but not for the wider community. I also work alongside with all the other council in the region on climate change impact assessments.
Yeah.
And this impact assessment is at a regional level, but obviously will include our district. And it is due in end of the year, in December of this year. And then in 2 years' time, 2024, we will have regional adaptation plan based on this impact assessment. But yes, the work I've presented you today is really only for the organization.
But that aside, if you do want to be connected or not, let me know so I can make sure you are. The other side of the presentation, or the other presentation was on flood risk, and so there wasn't that sustainability, but Andy was presenting on flood risk and what they're doing to beef up their awareness, their response, their recovery.
Yeah,
and that goes straight into this kind of thing because we've got all of our towns. Already are in floodplains, and so flood risk is a very big risk exacerbated by climate change for all towns.
Yeah, I'd be interested to be connected.
So, Brenda, anybody else got any questions or comments for Mel?
Looking forward to the workshops now.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
Great work.
Yeah, we already did a workshop. Obviously, I'm doing the same work for Cardston District Council, and we had the first workshop last week. It was very, very interesting. So I'm sure it's going to be a very good workshop with South Warra District Council.
Touches on everything we do, doesn't it?
Thanks so much, Melvin. You've been very patient this morning. Waiting all this time.
Thanks.
Let's go on to item C4, which is the action item report. I'd like someone to nominate and receive the finance audit and risk action items report. Thank you. Alex and seconded. Brenda, all in favour?
Aye.
Motion passes. Right. Well, I think it's just a question of has anybody got any comments?
Have we got on number 55, which was regard to development contribution plan changes, it's just empty. But it's been there for 3 months.
Oh, look, I have to check with Russell. Oh, yeah, no, I don't know. Oh, sorry.
Now, also 248, there was quite a significant government announcement on their approach to waste recycling. We might change that, say how that impacts on our current policy and contracts. So it's doing the same thing, but updating it, I suppose, with the changes in government legislation.
So you kept.
Through you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, with regards to the actions report, instead of us saying, hey, there's no updates in there, say maybe a week prior to this meeting, if the ELT could have a look at the actions list and just say no further updates, or just something quick and simple like that. Could that be?
Yeah, we do, and you'll find, so that's why we're trying to close off as many as we can.
Yeah, but I mean, for example, Mayor Alex brought up item 55, which has got absolutely nothing in it. I mean, you could say, sorry, no update to provide.
Yeah,
So
okay. Yeah,
that type of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other comments about the action report?
You're tromping through them. The strategic risk knocked out a couple. That's.
And I think it's going to be deleted item 54 for next time, which I'm assuming it will be anyway. So I've virtually been out with everybody right across the whole district. That's all the progress, and I've just got to go out to the coast.
Yes, we noticed that. At Rahini Reservoir, there's
one there.
Big logo there.
Yeah.
On the coast, there's all sorts of
Well, yeah, I'm getting through that.
I think
I've discovered a whole new side of Featherston with Brenda the other day.
I'm quite sure that the coast did have someone GPSing and photographing and logging every
The
site.
trouble is that none of it can be downloaded, and so it's sort of a bit of a waste of money, to be honest. But anyway, I'm getting there. So
We're looking forward to the coast trip.
So hopefully sooner rather than later I can present it all, and I've been working with Stefan and obviously Bryce and everybody, so everybody's in the loop there. Thank you. Well, with nothing further in mind, I'd like to declare this meeting closed at 11:30. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. So, thank you, Brenda. We'll see you later.
See you later.
See you, Brenda.